The debate among hardcore literary enthusiasts and TV show watchers continues. Is Lord of the Rings better than Game of Thrones? If you're not a dumbass, the answer is yes. Of course, Lord of the Rings is better. It's way better executed, has way better lore, has way more engaging characters, and a better sense of morality and being based in traditional values. Like A Song of Ice and Fire, in comparison, is just boomer slop, where everything is like terrible and evil for no reason. It is embarrassing. It's cringy. George R. R. Martin is a fraud who wishes he was J.R.R. Tolkien. It is shocking to me how characters like Denethor are far more engaging, memorable, nuanced, iconic than anyone in A Song of Ice and Fire. Like the entire core cope among A Song of Ice and Fire fans is that, like, oh, it's more morally gray, it's more realistic. This is how things actually are in the world of politics. No, they really aren't. Like, you're not seeing, like, you don't see this, like, you don't see people endlessly fighting for power and control over a meaningless throne. They fight for power and control over their assets and what they care about. Like A Song of Ice and Fire, fundamentally at its core, is completely pointless. Nothing in it that that happens in it matters at all, and it all just it all just refuses to end because George is a fraud who doesn't understand that things aren't as grimdark or like gritty as he likes to present them as. Like Game of Thrones is weirdly like unrealistic in how it presents like family dramas and political issues, and just feels like not nearly as well thought out as its fanboys like to claim, as opposed to Tolkien, which is a lot more is way more elaborate when it comes to, like, different cultures, their different values, their different belief systems, their cultures, their history, their language. Even like it all just comes together to create something that's far more gritty, I'm sorry, far more grounded and real than anything Martin will ever has or ever will write. It's kind of startling, the way Tolkien handles it, where characters actually have friends, they actually have dynamics, they actually have like family histories and stuff like that. With George R. R. Martin, it all just feels very flat. It feels very basic. It feels very uninspired. It feels as if it doesn't really it's not really, there's no real point to it other than like gaslighting people and they're like, oh man, it's so complex, like, oh, it's so such moral dilemmas, and it's all just fake. It's all just completely it just all just completely falls flat to the point where Martin can't even finish his own books. It's kind of shocking in comparison when you see, like, how Tolkien does it, where they save the world, like that, they stop Sora, and Aragorn is made king, Faramir marries Eowyn like a boss, like you have all this, like, all these good, happy things. The hobbits go home and they find that things aren't going well there. And like Discovering the Shire is a really interesting chapter in Lord of the Rings because I think it is one of the best chapters in it because it really demonstrates like the depth and complexity of the world and what's happening, and just how like the hobbits are like have grown and evolved throughout their adventures. It's such a great contrast to like the rest of it, and it really showcases, I think, the some of the one of the themes of Lord of the Rings, like, the idea that Sauron is not like the absolute evil in the setting. There's more like people out there doing all terrible things all the time. Like, it really adequately, like, really demonstrates that very, very well. And but it also demonstrates that the hobbits have developed well enough to be able to handle these situations on their own. You know, it's it's really interesting look at like how people like Martin think society like decays, how they think it's because of bad leadership, and they think it's because of evil machinations from like people who just been given a crown that they can't bear. Like, in reality, it's because of the people. Like the people, it's the people who decide how society functions, what the social norms are, what happens, the customs and like the general culture, right? And that's kind of the theme of the Scouring of the Shire. The idea that the hobbits can absolutely control their own destiny and can kind of deal with someone like Sauron, who is like supposed to be like the wizard, the head of the council, and like someone who debased himself so thoroughly that he really thought that going to the Shire and like screwing with a bunch of hobbits would get one up over them. It's like that Saruman is basically a George R. R. Martin character like transplanted into like Lord of the Rings. Like that is exactly what would happen. Is that like, oh, I'm gonna my machinations have like detected undetected for years, and I am going to destroy you. Like again, beaten by the hobbits of all characters, not the cool badass characters with like these hardcore lineages, not Aragorn, king of the land, not Gandalf the White, not like like Galadriel. Like it was the hobbits, and this is the interesting thing about Lord of the Rings, where like it goes to such lengths to demonstrate why like the hobbits are like valued members of the fellowship, why what the hobbits do matters, and like how that like contributes to like a stable, fulfilling, happy society. And that's something that George, being a boomer, cannot wrap his head around. Like to George, the only thing that matters is like sitting around not writing, engaging in like all sorts of degenerate acts and like being selfish and unhinged. Like it really moved me seeing like in Lord of the Rings, how like the ring has like destroyed Frodo at the end, and he tells Sam that like I gave everything I had for you, so you can start your family, so you can like rebuild the Shire, so you can do this, like for like I sacrificed myself for you, and to me that was like the complete antithesis to like what Game of Thrones represents. The idea that like all anybody cares about is power or control or like becoming wealthy or like like having selfish desires. Like it's a very boomer mentality, and it's something that absolutely needs to die with the boomer generation. And I think this is why Lord of the Rings has kind of endured as a cultural milestone for decades, is because while the rest of society has been decaying all around it, Lord of the Rings has stood tall as kind of this like major cultural landmark, something that kind of you know, emphasizes the goodness of a humanity and like nature and just the value of being part of a community. Something that like George R. R. Martin never has and never will do. George is a fat, lazy retard who can't even finish his most well-known work, because he knows that nothing he does is going to stand on the same level as Lord of the Rings, as the Grey Havens. Like nothing is going to ever like impact people the same way, Like I've said this before about A Song of Ice and Fire, but like the hype around it is always like hinged on this idea of like the possibility of something happening, of like of like the situation being set up, and like, oh man, like the stage is set, something's gonna happen, there's gonna be some kind of like crazy revelation and plot twist, and then it never comes. Like A Song of Ice and Fire has been dragged out for so long and has built up to absolutely nothing that it really it really needs to be said that it really is all hype and no substance, because without a cohesive ending, without a point to all of the the situations that have occurred. Like all A Song of Ice and Fire is a bunch of random events that don't coincide, that don't build up to anything meaningful, that just feel padded as all out. Like I've said this several times before, but there is no reason for A Song of Ice and Fire to be as long as it is. Like it is something that like a competent writer probably could have cranked out in like a single novel. Like nothing happens in these books that is in any way substantial. Like you could cut like a significant chunk of all the all the plot lines, all the characters, all the setting, like, and you would lose absolutely nothing. Like that's kind of my mindset of A Song of Ice and Fire. Like it's trying to be the dark subversive. it's trying to be the dark, subversive boomer equivalent of Lord of the Rings, and yet it can't really do it. Like, it is pretty much like the textbook example of, like, that famous J.R.R. quote, Tolkien quote, where he says that evil cannot create, it can only corrupt. And that's kind of my view of, like, George R.R. Like him clearly aping off the J.R.R. thing. Like, George R.R. is just a fraud. He's a hack who, like, built his entire career trying to, like, subvert Lord of the Rings. Like, oh, what was Aragorn's tax policy? Like, he is a complete boomer and really needs to be condemned as such. And his fans who genuinely think that A Song of Ice and Fire is somehow peak storytelling, go back and watch season 8 of Game of Thrones again. I dare you.